Hello and welcome to the YouTube channel for craftworldeldar.com. I'm Brent, and tonight I'm here with a guest who is triply prestigious among Space Elf enthusiasts because he is A, Craftworld's playtester, B, co-host of the Infinity Circuit podcast, and he was co-host for, I think, at least 5 years of the much-loved, now tragically defunct Splintermind podcast, and weirdly, he is arguably the most notable Corsair player in the hobby at a time when Corsairs are, we don't know where. So let me introduce Alex. Thanks so much for coming on the show, Alex. We love having you.
Thank you, man. I'm happy to be here. I love your YouTube channel.
Oh, I appreciate it. So as you are a Corsair expert and longtime Corsair player, I've got to ask, what do you think of the newly revealed Corsair model / kill team role for them?
I am beyond stoked. The model looks really, really great. I was happy to see that it sort of fits in with the aesthetic that I have with like my own army. I've spent, because as soon as Corsairs came out, I started them in 5th edition, and so I was kit bashing away for years and years and years, and that particular model is going to fit in just perfect with my army. I have a lot of like fantasy beasts and monsters and stuff like that to act as like 40k counterparts. So I'm really excited. I'm really excited about Corsairs. I'm glad that they're back.
Yeah, no, that's totally cool. I mean, I'll say it so I don't forget later. If you do want to see some of Alex's models, where can they find you on Instagram, Alex?
I am Eldar underscore Cavalier at Instagram.
But if you just Google Eldar Corsairs, like you're in an image search, it's Alex's models you're looking at. Let's be clear. So, as soon as they dropped the picture of the like Hannibal Lecter as swashbuckling pirate captain bird enthusiast, you were like the first person I thought of. It's such a cool model, and this is probably something you can't tell us, but I see we're going to have rules for Corsairs and Kill Team. I assume it's a reasonable inference that we're probably going to be able to use them in some way, shape, or form in 40k also.
Well, for those familiar with Splintermind, all I can say is just keep glazing.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's really exciting. I mean, it's such a cool part of the lore too, and I think honestly, if you go all the way back to the Rogue Trader days, the Corsairs are more in line with the original conception for Aeldari at the very beginning of the game, and it's kind of weird that they've been edged out, given that that's the case. Is that fair?
Yeah, they are the original Eldar faction. There was Eldar Corsairs before there was Craft Worlds, before there was anything else, Harlequins, any of that stuff. So they were a unit entry that you could take in 2nd edition, and then they sort of vanished after that. They came back in Battlefleet Gothic, and I actually, Brian, my old co-host, gave me a Corsair fleet that I definitely plan on playing. I actually think that the old battle focus mechanic that was in the 7th edition Codex came from that, because the Corsair ships could move, shoot, move. And then they came back in 5th edition, and then they were reborn again in 7th. And then they got wiped out, and apparently they're coming back. So I'm really excited about that. It's cool because I sort of thought that they might come back in the beginning of 8th or the beginning of 9th edition, when I saw that they got a nod in the lore,
right,
the back of the main book in relation to Yunari and all of that. So I'm really excited they came out with models, because that was a huge blow. I mean, I lost my whole army.
I know. Yeah,
in 8th edition. That was tragic.
Yeah, no, it's the idea of them really getting a bunch of unique models, I think, is super exciting. I remember back when I was a kid and I started playing, there was like one of those old school metal guardians that had an eye patch and like a couple of melee weapons. That was clearly intended as like, you're going to run some Eldar pirates. This is going to be your Eldar pirate captain, back when they didn't make models for them. So I love that, like, in some cases, more than 20 years on, GW is finally honoring content with models that were conceptualized in the early days of the game. It's so cool.
Yeah, it's so old, it's new.
It's so old, it's new. Yeah.
Yeah, they're really diving into the sort of more esoteric areas of the lore right now. I think, like, even I think it's probably like the generation of, sculptors and writers and, people that are coming into Games Workshop as a company that were inspired by all that stuff and want to bring all of that back. I think it's pretty evident in a lot of the new sculpts that you're seeing, where it's a lot of references to, Mark Gibbons' art, John Blanche, I'm thinking
Right.
of the Templars. And I mean, it's phenomenal. Like, why reinvent the wheel? Like, you have the artistry and the technology to bring all of that amazing artwork to life. Why not embrace it? I love it. I love it because it's something exciting for old school players and people who've never seen that stuff before.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's cool to have been playing the game for a long, well, just being into, I think, sci-fi fantasy stuff in general, to finally be at an age where people who are your age are the content creators. So all the stuff you wanted to see when you were 15 exists now. And that is amazing. And it's certainly weirdly true in 40K also.
Yeah, a lot of they've had a lot of sort of like crowd pleasers lately, which I'm glad about. Just at least in terms of like at least for Eldar. I mean, holy moly! So Craft World Eldar. I mean, the stuff that's coming out, I'm so excited about, and I've mentioned this on my show many times. But just for the sake of your subscribers, we don't like unless there's like drastic changes to war gear, we don't know what the new models are going to be unless it's like a totally new model.
Right.
So if like there's no new war gear or whatever, because there's no artwork or photography in the playtesting books,
Right.
so we're just left guessing. Like could there be new fire dragons? We don't know.
Right.
So all of this new stuff is really exciting for me, especially because it has such a retro twist. And I mean, Corsairs. I mean, what more could I ask for?
Yeah, it's so cool. Yeah, so you mentioned these sort of like shadowy playtesting versions of the Codex. I I'm really excited to talk to you about the experience you've had play. Obviously, right? I got some questions from Patreons, and we know that there are huge limits to what you can say, and we certainly don't want to get you in any kind of trouble. But I think that most of the people who play 40K at anything beyond the most casual level are totally fascinated by the idea that there are members of the community who are playtesters, who have early access to this stuff, who get to give feedback to GW, and kind of shape the way the game develops. It's super exciting and super interesting. It's not quite like knowing somebody who's up there in the CIA, but I feel like it's kind of in the same category of stuff. It's this sort of shadowy insiderism, which is really super sexy to those of us who aren't part of it. So how did you end up being a playtester? That's so cool.
Yeah, well, it was sort of I guess it's not like a huge reveal, but it was sort of through the independent characters originally, through Carl and Brian and
Mm,
all of those guys. We were brought in for like the narrative side of things, and
yeah.
just like what that really means is like people think, oh, that's just Crusade, or that's just like, whatever. Really, it's like making sure that like the lore translates to the tabletop, making sure that things feel right. It's more about feel than like hard. We're not like running, you know, sort of the numbers or whatever.
Right.
It's more about like ideas and like, does this idea feel right? So, and just like ideas for rules and whatnot. I mean, a lot of times, like, they come up with the mechanics. Like, we don't come up with the mechanics. Like, it's just, we're just sort of like a sounding board, or we give them our ideas, and some of the stuff they come up with, like, I don't think they're given enough credit for just how clever they really are, because you'll give them a very just sort of uh, prosy sort of description of like how you think something should work, and then they come up with this totally crazy mechanic to bring it to life, and it's just, you realize that they are the real professionals. We might have good ideas, but they're the ones that translate it into an actual game.
Yeah, no, and I like what you said. I mean, there's so much saltiness out there in the community about rules, and I think it's easy to forget how much work goes into this, and that the people who are making the game are real people, and oftentimes the people who write the rules have no control over, how long it takes for something to come out, or what is released when, or whatever. There are a lot of Games Workshop is not some sort of monolithic hive mind, right? There are a lot of
No.
people who are part of this, and I I personally have been really impressed in the last few years about the degree to which the rules do feel like they invoke the lore. That I think is the thing I'm most excited about with the ninth edition Codex, is even though we haven't gotten ours yet, is watching it happen for other factions. And that beautiful moment with Harlequins, right, when the Psychic Awakening stuff all dropped, they felt so much like Harlequins. So it's really interesting to hear that that is your primary job as a playtester, or where you have fit in the past in the world of playtesting, is to make sure that those things line up, because it's so important, right?
Yeah, yeah, and I think anybody who's familiar with my old show, there's that was sort of like our issue with like the Drukhari Codex. It's like, as much as I'm a Drukhari fan and I'm glad that they're riding high, there was a lot of things in terms of feel that I was not happy, that like just didn't resonate with me. I wish that it was different. So, but yeah, they're real people and they work extremely hard. I mean, it's just such a huge game. I don't think people understand just how big of a task it is to manage this game, and there's just so much that goes into it. And I think like right now it's I can understand people's frustrations. I have a lot of the same ones. Like 8th edition, I think the way that things were released, getting all the codexes out in a year, really lent to a sort of healthier game on the whole.
Amen.
But I think if you look at like ninth edition, like the codexes that are all out really all compete with each other. I guess like Space Marines are lagging like a little bit behind, but I don't know. I still think that there's units in the Space Marine Codex that people have really not fully latched onto. I know that sounds crazy because it's been out for so long, but I think some of those like standard Codex Astartes chapters have a ton of depth still. It's just so anyways, I think that like the ninth edition codexes on the whole, if you look at them, they're all very competitive with each other, Drukhari being sort of the outlier.
Right. Yeah, I sometimes worry a little bit too with some of the nerfs. AdMech, their codex dropped. They were incredible. I was really frustrated playing against new AdMech right after the codex dropped, because it felt like they were able to do most of the Craft Worlds things better than Craft Worlds for fewer points. But now looking at the nerf that they got, and then sort of hearing the stories about what's coming for Tau, I do sort of wonder if maybe there wasn't a disadvantage to some of these other factions getting codexes first that then got nerfed, that maybe really were balanced against the others. And the problem is not an overpowered codex so much as the drip feed of the rules to the community.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I think that probably is the biggest issue. And I know that there's, just because of the pandemic and everything like that, there's been production issues, distribution issues, all that kind of stuff. I hope that changes. Obviously, production, distribution, I hope all of that changes. I hope the model changes overall, and trying to get the books out in a more timely manner. I think like a year's worth of time to put out like the entire range of codices is probably, I know it sounds like a lot, but honestly, something I've always wanted to see the rules writers do something besides reimagine the codexes. I would love to see what else they could bring to the table, for the game. Just like, enough with the codexes, like let's get something else.
Yeah, no, I agree. I said to Brad Chester in the interview last week, I would love to see everybody get their codex up front, and then stuff like Armies of Renown, instead of giving us better rules, give us different ways to play the army that we already have, right? Or something like Corsairs getting their own sub-faction book or something, I think would be really cool, which I don't know if that's a reasonable thing to hope for, and I hope it is. I hope that how the release has gone down in 9th edition, as you say, has been the result of distribution issues, and that what we could expect to see in the future is something more like the indexes at the beginning of 8th, followed by a pretty rapid release of codexes. That seems much healthier for a game that is trying to embrace some more competitive play. For a long time, I think GW was sort of not interested in competitive play. Is that fair?
Yeah, well, I think that they might have been. I have no insight into this directly,
Hmm.
but I think I've told this story before, at least on Splinter Mind, that in like the '90s, TSR was who produced like Dungeons and Dragons was owned by one of the inheritors of the Buck Rogers fortune, and one of the things that the CEO one of her mandates was that the people who wrote D&D were not allowed to play test. And
Hmm.
so they had to like play test the game like off off the clock. And so, it's just like one of those things where, weird corporate diktats,
Right.
sort of govern a lot of these things. And what I honestly think is like I think they had to do the indexes because it was a new game system. Like 8th edition was a completely different game system.
Yeah. No, that's a good point.
Assuming there's no major changes, like when 10th edition eventually comes out, they could just go straight into codexes and just sort of hopefully condense and simplify what they've done in 9th edition into something a little bit more easy to produce. Because I'd definitely be in favor of more of a game system more similar to that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's true. And you make a good point. Eighth Ed was kind of a unique moment, so it's probably not necessarily analogous. The fast release is probably the more important thing.
Yeah, for sure.
So what's the hardest? It's really cool that you're a playtester for Games Workshop, but what about that is most difficult to do or balance or handle?
Man, there's just so much to go through with each codex, and sort of like the communication like within the playtesting group. It takes a lot of coordination and really really going through it. And there's just the game is just so huge and it's so complex. So it's just and it really is like a second job a lot
Yeah,
of times. Like
yeah,
it really is. Like you gotta, it's like when it's like play testing day, when it's just time to go through the book or whatever, just for myself, it's like, you know, you're gonna slot like, 4 or 5 hours of just like going through it, making notes, all of that kind of stuff, and then, taking it to the table and play testing it. It's because you're not just gaming like for your own enjoyment. You're like stress testing things and making sure that you understand the rules properly, which can be difficult, because obviously not all the playtesters are able to just like rock up to GWHQ and just like talk with the talk with the
right,
guys. So it's just the most difficult thing is just the amount of time that you have to sink into it.
right. Do you have? Is there a quick turnaround time? Can you ask questions of the rules writers and get a quick response if you don't understand something?
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, there are big time like time pressures, but there is a good amount of time to do all of this stuff. But you know, you really, really have to distill what you're asking. Like, you have to get as much bang for your buck out of your questions as possible because like time is of the essence. Your own time, their time zones, all the rest of it.
Right. Yeah. Well, it's no. It makes sense. And when you are working on a schedule like that, actually one of my patrons wanted me to ask you whether GW gives you some sort of performance questionnaire that's got like a structured set of questions designed to get at particular concerns, or whether the feedback is much more freeform.
I mean, I can't really get into specifics, but like they always, there's always something. There's like a lot of different things that they want to know about, and they also, they're very open to you just presenting ideas, getting ahead of the curve, talking about stuff that is way down the line. Like, they're very open. They're an amazing group of guys. It's I have a huge amount of respect. They're so smart, and yeah, I can't get into specifics, but No, they're very open to just us advancing like our own ideas and concerns, and
That's so cool.
vice
I'm
versa.
positive everybody listening to this right now is very jealous of you. The so is it like a one and done thing where they give you the playtest version of the codex, you provide a bunch of feedback, there's some communication, and then eventually the book comes out? Or do you make suggestions, they do revisions, and then you try a revised version of it? Is this going through multiple versions?
I mean, I can't get into specifics on that, but what I will say is that is crazy involved. It is ridiculous sometimes. Like some books, like way more than others, and where it's just, I mean, you're sometimes like sometimes it's like really hard. Like I'll be going to like the table to just play like a regular game or a playtest game, and I'm like I have to get out the book and just be like, am I remembering you know the seventh edition book, or is this some version of a playtest book, or the Codex, or whatever?
Right.
Yeah, it's like I can't get into specifics, but there is very involved. There, one
Yeah.
and done is no.
So I think that thing that you just said about like all of the different versions that you look at, do you ever find yourself struggling to play according to current rules outside of your own micro meta where you're testing? Is it hard to keep straight like what is currently legal at the local game store?
Yeah, and especially like right now, it's like I'll be like totally honest. Like it's hard to get in games like sort of outside of play testing. Like I have to like be like, okay, let's play current 40K,
Right.
and like
Because
that's one of the downsides of it for sure is that
right.
like you're sort of out of sync with the rest of the community. Like you only exist in playtest world sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it would be for the rest of us. Like, we get our codex, we play with the new codex for 3 months, and then somebody taps us on the shoulder and is like, "Hey, Brent, do you want to play a game of 40K, but you have to use the 8th Ed Codex again?" It, I'm sure in like June or July, I would be pretty unenthusiastic about that proposition, down at the local game store. And that's kind of your always, right? I mean, that sounds
Yeah,
hard.
yeah, it is, and it's like some of the local playtesters that I have like they've moved, so I've lost those sort of people that I can play with. Um, but yeah, it can be challenging, and it was easier in eighth edition because everything came out so quickly.
Right.
But ninth edition has been like a massive amount of workload, so there's really been no shortage of games. Um,
Right.
but at the same time, like I think of like Orcs and Thousand Suns and just the immense amount of time that I spent with those books, so that when I know it's like everyone has been going nuts about Orcs, for example, for a while now. But the cool thing is that like you can talk to people and give them really quality advice on how to deal with orcs and all the various builds, because you've had so much time to spend just conceptually with them and in actual playtesting.
Yeah, I never really thought about that aspect of it. There's like this weird aspect of playtesting that's sort of like insider trading or something. Like you've
Yeah,
you've had months to figure out how to beat these armies, uh, which is which is cool. I mean, that's gonna has to be hugely valuable when you get to the point with your own content on Infinity Circuit where you get to start talking about the new codex, right? I mean, the rest of us will be in the position of trying to figure it out and get some games in the first week, and you will have had months and months and months. So
yeah.
that's awesome.
Yeah, and like one of the things that can be kind of disheartening, as a playtester, as a content creator, is all the leaks and all that kind of stuff, because you work so hard, you know what I
Right,
mean, to be able to sort of present that material first,
right.
but the trade-off is that like you have actual experience, so it's not about just being first. It would be nice to be first,
Sure.
but you have a lot of battle tested advice to give to players, and in regards to like just the craft world book, for example, like I've spent so much time with like the new one, but you realize that some of the tools, like the things I'm excited about and and things to come, do exist in the current codex. So, like, just for example, like I was really big on like wind riders and stuff like that because of I knew AdMech was going to be such a thing when that codex came out, and
Right.
they're great for clearing light infantry.
Right.
So, you know, even if you are sort of like, way down the road in terms of just where the game is going, you can sort of reverse engineer some of that stuff and apply it to some of the older codexes and sort of see value in what you have, out in the wild.
Yeah, imagine that's especially true with the Psychic Awakening rules. I know you obviously can't say anything about this, but it seemed, I think, to many of us in Psychic Awakening, especially with some of the custom craft world traits, like maybe there were certain buffs for these units that were being tested out or we were getting to experiment with. And I'm sure that in retrospect, there will have been ways, right, to kit some of the units out now as they will be in the future codex. And so it's got to be frustrating to watch people complain and not using tools that are available to them. Although I do think it's not, any way you cut it, it's a tricky time to be a Craft Worlds player, even if it's not nearly as bad as a lot of people seem to think.
Oh yeah, I don't think it's really that bad. I heard your interview with Brad Chester, and I was going crazy when he was talking about like this codex has so many tools, and they really do. Like that, I mean, the current codex has a lot of tools. A lot, obviously the aspect warriors are nowhere near what they should be. Like
No.
that is patently obvious. I mean, they are in a pathetic state right now. But I mean, this isn't like fifth edition where I think I've talked about this before. Like quarter of the way through sixth edition, Craft World Eldar players were playing with a fourth edition book. It's
Yeah.
not that bad.
Right.
Like, but it's not great. For one of the headline armies, like, I'm right there with, Tyranids are doing fine right now, but,
Yeah.
Tyranid guards, guard, chaos. Oh my God, please help them.
I know. Yeah.
It's tough.
They've got it
But
much worse. It's true.
yeah. So, I mean, we're not like Chaos Space Marine players, and Chaos Space Marine players have been in that spot for a long time. This goes back like to sixth edition.
The sheer indignity of still having only one wound after it was announced over a year ago that they're going to two wounds is just, my heart really goes out. It's,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah. It's a
brutal.
toughie, man. It's a toughie.
No, that's fair enough. Yeah, I mean, there's no, like, Craft World's best in direct fire in the game. They're super fast. We can make one unit insanely vulnerable and one unit insanely tough. I mean, there's all sorts of great tools. And as I said to Brad last week, I think that it took people over a year to figure out that the Night Spinner was good. I mean, it is a deep codex, and I'm sure that we didn't figure out everything we could have done with it. But at the same time, I'm so excited for the new book.
Yeah.
I feel completely confident just based on the other codexes that and what Craft World Eldar are, that the army is going to have so much more depth, and there are going to be so many good ways to play it, that I feel like, rightly I think, whatever kind of Craft World player you are, you'll be able to bring your signature style to the table and have a game in competitive play. And obviously you can't say, but maybe you could talk about what kind of Craft World player you are, and therefore how you are most excited to play going forward.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can't say anything specifically, but I am massively excited for this codex. I mean, I am beyond stoked, and I have been for a long time. But, in terms of my style, I am a sort of speed and power guy. Like, I love just outmaneuvering and just like isolating and destroying my opponent like one piece at a time, and then just sort of taking ground as like I clear my opponent, off the board. And even with like the current codex, like I know this sounds like an insane boast, but like I there are times like I really don't even feel like I need Craft World traits. Like I feel like if you just, there's enough shenanigans and tricks, and if you put like, especially you throw some Harlequins in there, like you can really go to town. But yeah, I'm a speed and power guy. Like that to me is like what Eldar are all about, offense and speed. And I try to I try to bring that to the table every single time that I play, and I want to bring like the fastest army that you've ever seen every time I play.
Yeah, one of my patrons wanted me to ask you what your favorite craft world is and why. I mean, I think we can make some reasonable inferences there, but can you tell us?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely like Sam Han is my jam. The jet bikes, shining spears, Hornets. I'm a huge, huge, huge
I know
fan
you are.
of Hornets.
I know
Like
you are.
everybody that ever listens to Splinter Mine, I could do a whole show about Hornets.
Yeah.
And I love all the Forge World stuff too. Like I'm a big fan of the Lynx, Warp Hunter, all of that kind of stuff. And I just, that's my jam. I love Sam Han. I was originally like an Ulthway player. I still have a soft spot for Ulthway, Eandon, big time. But Sam Han, that's my jam. That's the way I bring war to the table.
Yeah, no, thematically, it totally makes sense. I think in your most recent Infinity Circuit episode, you and Wes were talking about craft worlds armies in which not a single model actually touches the board,
Yep.
just thematically. And I thought that was such a fun idea. And I've run lists before where I had just insane numbers of bikes or whatever, but I've never disciplined myself to have absolutely no models with boots on the ground. And I, based on your episode, just for kicks, I wrote a list and took it to the game store last Tuesday. And it is fun to commit to a particular thematic idea and maybe even set up little limitations like that for yourself. It force you to be creative in a little bit with more restrictions. I think sometimes you come up with better solutions to big problems when you actually narrow a little bit how you're willing to solve them.
Yeah, I think like for me, one of the big advantages of it, like in game, is that your army has sort of consistent mechanical expression.
Yeah.
Like the way the units operate in the game are also similar. That it becomes a very cohesive force. Like in 8th edition, I had some crazy powerful builds, but like when I decided to sort of like dial back like the raw power in favor of control, if that makes sense,
Yeah.
like you better control over your army, particularly like in the movement phase, like more cohesive army in the movement phase, I think lends itself to a better performing army overall. It might not show up in like weight of dice or something like that,
Right.
but ninth edition isn't really about like offense. It's really about scoring, objectives, movement,
Right.
deployment, and if you sort of lean into that as an Eldar player or just any player in general, like an army that moves more cohesively as a single unit, I don't know. I think that there's a competitive edge there.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. I mean, there's so much flexibility in movement, so many really capable small units that like warp spiders bamfing around the board. Actually, a couple days ago I talked to Mark Vickery over in the UK about a list that he's been running. He was the top Craft Worlds player in the ITC last year, and he talked about an exercise that he did with another player where they played the whole game and Mark was not allowed to charge anything or shoot anything, and he just had to try to score, and he still only lost by 8 or 9 points.
Oh yeah.
Which I think is what a cool exercise, right? And it demonstrates something about Craft Worlds, which is that you don't have to be the biggest dog in the game to win. There are a lot of options. So I think I probably know how you're going to answer this based on what you've already said, but another one of my Patreons wanted me to ask, if GW were to get everything absolutely right, what kind of army does that make Craft Worlds, in your opinion, thematically? Like, what would that look like?
I think they're like a strike and fade army. I think like it could be frustrating for people who go up against Craft World Eldar or just Eldar in general, but I think Eldar armies, all the Eldar factions, should be frustrating to play against. The whole thing is they're difficult to get to grips with, and they're punishing you if you can't get to grips with them.
Right.
And I think like even when Eldar were like at their absolute heyday and seventh edition and things like that, I would always just be like, if these people that went up against this army had just a little bit more mobility, they would be fine.
Yeah.
I think it's just people don't want to adapt sometimes to like what Craft World Eldar like bring to the table. Like you have to try and outmaneuver them. Like you can't just try to like out kill them. It's not even about that. It's about taking them apart like piece at a time. So making them, I hate to say it, but like somewhat like frustrating army to get to grips with. I think that's the thing.
Yeah, I remember, back on Splinter Mind, I think you and Brian used to talk about that a lot, and sometimes feeling frustrated that GW seemed to be leaning away from ever creating any kind of a feel bad moment at the table, and that getting your ass kicked by Eldar maybe should involve some feel bad moments, because that's who they are. And I don't, from a game design perspective, I don't know what I think about this. I think that there's pretty good arguments on both sides from just the perspective of people enjoying the game, but they're definitely thematically it would be justified to have like a 1990s blue magic cards, everything you try to do hurts you and nothing works vibe going. What do you think the limitations of something like that would be? How do you balance the ability to foul up what your opponent is trying to do with not having those mechanics be potentially game breaking if played well?
I mean, you just, in my opinion, the units, like the heavy hitters, are fragile and expensive. So as they start losing, Eldar players start losing pieces, their sort of symphony of destruction sort of falls apart.
Right.
And that to me is really what it is. I think like a few months ago, before like Thick City hit the scene, I think like even though Drukhari were like extremely good, people didn't hate them quite as much because you were killing them at the rate that they were killing you. You were
Right.
trading units, and I think that that's like important. Is that if you connect with an Eldar army, if you land that hit, they die, and that's the way that it should be. Wraith host and pain engines notwithstanding, the regular space elves, they die and they die quick if
Right.
they're in the wrong spot, and you shouldn't have like too much redundancy, at least from like a craft world perspective.
Speaking of elves dying, are you a Yannari guy?
Oh yeah, I love the Yannari. I mean, I didn't necessarily love the way Yannari, like the reading experience of the Gathering Storm book, but conceptually, I thought the Yannari were amazing. I mean, that was like the idea behind my army. Like when I got back into the game, like I've told this story like many times, but when I got back into the game in 5th edition, I just had a weird hunch that allies were going to come back, so I started a Drukhari army, and I painted the Drukhari and Corsairs and Craft World elements of my army all in the same paint scheme. So
Wow, you are prescient. That is
yeah,
amazing.
and on top of it, I did them in red and gold, which are the Yannari colors, and so later on, I'm like, wow, I have like 5 armies.
That's incredible.
Yeah, so I love the idea of the Yannari, like the Eldar finally being like, hey, Slanesh, maybe we should do something about this.
Yeah.
So yeah, I love the Yannari. They're cool.
Did you know that back in the 3rd edition Codex, there's a reference in the fiction in the back to the to Yniad or Ynad or however we're saying it?
Oh yeah. It's with the Iana. It was the Spirit Seer from Eandon, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I only
Gav Thorpe wrote that.
Yeah, Gav Thorpe wrote that. I only recently found out that was the case. I didn't realize that. It's like Shroud Runners are mentioned in the 2nd ed Codex as like I don't know, it's a piece of war gear or a special ability or something. It's all
Yeah.
of these callbacks. It's so cool.
Yeah, it was like plus 20 points per model to put your ranger. Like they could like disembark from them and all sorts of stuff. It was crazy.
So, do you see yourself getting your Yannari on the table later this year?
I mean, I was you know, sort of famous for saying that even though like current Unari are nothing compared to what they were, I still think that like current Unari still have really good tools. They have like access to reroll wounds all over the place. They have an advance and charge strat. You know, the invulnerable spell. I'm talking about like the, you know, the current book. I think like the one thing that really hampers them, you know, currently is just, you know, the way that you put together the army. You're really paying a premium for those detachments. But yeah, like you know, in like the lore of my army, they are, you know, Yunari supporters, not like full blown, but you know, there's like a Yunari cult at like the heart of my particular army for sure. So I'm always interested in Yunari, and I really, really, really hope that they do more with them from like a lore perspective too. Like I'm really bummed that there's not more like Indomitus campaign, like more like post Gathering Storm stuff. Like where
Mm.
is that? Like I really want it. So yeah, Yunari all the way. I love Yunari.
Um, that's super cool. I do think even for people who are listening who maybe are not, you know, maybe if you're a pure Craft Worlds player, I think there's an enormous amount to be learned about playing Craft Worlds from playing the other elf faction, from playing any faction, but
Oh
from
yeah.
definitely from playing the other elf factions. And I think Unari definitely forced you to think. Playing Unari forces you to think about your Craft World models in a new way that uh, might actually continue to be helpful for you when you're not playing Unari. Does that seem true to you?
Oh my god, yeah. Like I in eighth edition, I actually played more Drukari than I played. I probably played more Drukari than I played anything. Like, and I'm craft world to the core. Like, but it's just I finally got my Drukari up and running, and I played them like mad. And like when I came back to craft worlds, I realized like, wow, what an amazing set of tools. Because I leaned really hard into the venoms, and I was like, oh, geez, I really need some anti-infantry. And then I was like, wait, I have like 80 million jet bikes over here. Like, this is a really good unit. And those
Yeah.
scatter lasers, like especially like I don't know what I was thinking in eighth edition, especially with like Thousand Suns, Dark Matter Crystal, Zangors, all that stuff. And I'm like, wait, I have this Farseer here. He's with a unit of 9 jet bikes that are guided. Anywhere like that those Zangors teleport, these guys are going to absolutely wipe them out. And eventually, like my Thousand Suns opponents just stopped bringing Zangors in those games because it's just like, what is the point? You're dumping like, you know, 50 strength 6 shots into my guys. And you know, the craft world book is so deep. Like Drukari fans are, you know, if you doing a Drukari show for a long time, there's so much that they are jealous of in terms of just unit selections, like the Viper. Like we are like, huh, the Viper. Like Drukari fan players would kill to have the Viper in their codex.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like the transport is a whole lot like a Viper that can only take a shuriken cannon, but fair enough.
Yeah, I mean, you really do see what they have, like in terms of just like war walkers, vipers, falcons, the wave serpent. Just there's so many platforms for special
Yeah,
weapons
that's
and
true.
heavy weapons that Harlequins and Drukhari don't have. Granted, like the craft world iteration of those weapons is not the best, you know, right now. But I mean, star cannons, like you know, were such. I mean, disintegrators were better in 8th edition, but I mean, just the sheer amount of platforms for star cannons and
Yeah.
whatnot, it's unmatched. The Craftworld book is really big.
Yeah, and I think it is reasonable to suppose that with the new codex, it's going to be a better version of what's great already, and that's super exciting. And I know that you can't reveal anything, but is there anything else you can tell us about the experience of playtesting, or that you wish people knew about playtesting without creating trouble for yourself before we move on to talking about your really cool podcast?
Um, I would definitely say that like this is probably the most excited I've been, um, probably since the Harlequin Codex from 8th edition. Just in terms of Eldari stuff. I mean, the new models alone. I mean, finally shining spears, new avatar, all of that.
Such a long wait for those shining spears.
Oh my
So
god!
excited.
I spent so much money making my shining spears, like so much money. But I just hope everyone's as excited as I am. It's been such a long wait. It's felt like ages for this to come about, and I think that no matter what you play in terms of Craft World, you are going to be very, very, very happy.
That is such great news. I'm so excited to hear that. I know that we have a huge variety of play styles among listeners, so I think that is what we all want to hear. That's so great.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the Infinity Circuit. What is it? Where can we find it? What's the Infinity Circuit, Alex?
The Infinity Circuit is a Aeldari podcast that myself and Wes from D6 Evolution, put together. We've been talking about this for a long, long time. Wes is a playtester too, and you can find us on Apple Podcasts. You can find us on Spotify, Google Podcasts, all the main things. Just search for Infinity Circuit Radio and you'll find us on there. And it's an Aeldari exclusive podcast. We cover the news, but only as it sort of pertains to Eldar. Like we're not gonna, we're not doing like a Tau review or whatnot. But I mean, if there's something that specifically seems like a threat or a huge opportunity, like in the meta or whatever, where like this army is going to be a huge menace to all the other top factions, but one of the Aeldari factions has their number, we'll definitely highlight it. But Infinity Circuit Radio, sort of the mission statement for it is to turn it into a resource for Aeldari players and just turn it into a resource for Aeldari players. Eldar content is very sort of rare to find on the internet, especially right now. You've got the Real Space Raiders, Polly and Tom and George. You've got yourself, Scary, and then me and Wes, and there's not too much else out there.
That's really about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think so. Currently you have 3 episodes up. Is that right?
Yeah, we have a number more in the can, and we're recording right now. So
that's great.
Not literally right now, but
yeah, I've really enjoyed the first 3. You guys have a nice conversational style, and the most recent episode, I heartily recommend to everyone who's listening on Aeldari play styles. It sounds like you and Wes have a very similar approach with move fast, hit hard. Don't be where they want you to be, and I think that's for both new players and veteran players. That's a great one to check out. Can you tell us a little bit about maybe what's coming in the next few months?
Yeah, well, obviously, we really hope that there's a Codex that we're going to be able to talk about real soon. But, independent of that, what we really want to talk about, I think like the sort of play style conversation is more important than lists and, army lists and, what's hot, what's not. I feel like figuring out what you want to do on the tabletop is probably one of the most elusive sort of pieces in the puzzle as a war gamer for a lot of people. And there's just so much to talk about in terms of all 3 factions, Harlequins, Asuryani, and Drukhari, in terms of all the different play styles that you can bring about, all the different builds, the factions. How do you make these things work? And making the concept work on the table is what we want to talk about. Because, I don't know, I've just found that I can sort of fight in any arena. It doesn't matter like how competitive the player is that I'm going up against, if he's bringing like the most hardcore medalist or just like some really talented garage gamer. I feel like people who have like a great idea of what they want their army to do are sort of able to adapt no matter what, no matter what kind of terrain you're dealing with, the skill of the opponent. If you know what you're trying to do with Eldar, you're at an immediate advantage, and that's what we want to do.
That sounds really great. I think so. Am I right in thinking that Wes is where like your heart is primarily with Craft Worlds and Wes is first and foremost Harlequins? Is that accurate?
Yeah. I mean, I'm like, I was definitely really, really into Drukhari in 8th edition. They really matched my playstyle. I think like Red Grief and Flayed Skull played like magic. But primarily, yeah, I'm a craft world player at heart. I'm really a Corsair guy. Like that
Yeah, of
is
course.
my like the 7th edition Corsair Codex was my absolute jam. That, setting that aside, craft worlds are my primary vehicle for for the game. But Wes is like a huge Harlequins player, and Wes is a very competitive player too. He's gone to LVO and slapped around some of the big boys, and he did that in years past, but with like 7th edition Harlequin book, which was really not that good. So Wes,
Yeah, and he's won some stuff too, hasn't he?
yeah, Wes is a absolutely dynamite player. Don't let his, mild mannered,
Yeah.
British personality fool you. I mean, he will tear you apart. He is such a good player.
Yeah, no, it seems like you have nice the vibe between you is nice on the air, and it seems like you bring complementary but slightly different expertise, which is also super cool. As somebody who loves all of the different Eldari factions, how are you looking at the new limitations on sub-faction soup and the sort of disincentives even for souping in armies from different factions? How do we feel about that?
It's a little tough as a Corsair player because like one of the coolest thing about Corsairs back in the day was that they took like multiple coteries or like small war bands, like each with their own sort of chapter tactic. They'd have like one chapter tactic. It really felt like it was set up for 8th edition.
Yeah.
So you lose a little bit of that because I have like multiple craft world armies that I play as different Corsair war bands. So
Right.
I have like my all black dudes who are sort of my Laytok themed, and then my red and gold guys who are more Sam Han or Yanari or whatever. But at the end of the day, I actually think it's better for the game. I think not mixing within, so you're not going to have like, an Yandon Vanguard and then a Sam Han Outrider and all that kind of stuff. I think in the end it will force people to be like more creative, and I think their army list will probably be better in the end. Like I was saying, I think armies like I think when you invest all of your points in an army that all performs in a very similar way, if it's like, if it's a Wraith host, you go with, as many big chunky boys as you can, then all of a sudden you start looking for the units that play into that style and operate cohesively with them. I think you're going to have probably higher performing armies and more creative lists that you're going to start see popping up. But at the same time, if you want more of an eclectic build, that's what the joy of the choose your own adventure chapter tactics are. Whether it's for Drukhari, hopefully for craft worlds, Space Marines, whatever, they have those custom traits,
Right.
for a reason. So if you want to do something a little bit more unique, that's what the custom traits are for.
Sure, you just won't be able to have two detachments with different sets of custom traits. But like you, I'm on board with this, and I think, and you just had a great set of reasons for why it actually might be better for your army and better for competitive play. I think I would be on board with this even if it weren't. I mean, you were talking before about how people, I think, inevitably sort of underestimate just how complex the game is, how many moving parts there are, and therefore how hard it is to write rules. Well, how do you write rules that don't incentivize people making sure all their bikes come from Sam Han and all their wraiths come from Eandon? Because if you honor the notion that wraiths are Eandon's thing and bikes are Sam Han's thing, then and people are allowed to combine them, then how could you possibly write rules that would create a situation where it makes sense to have a bunch of bikes from Eandon? And I think they've actually done a reasonably good job managing to make that make sense at all up until now. But I think that the whole sub faction soup thing seems to me like a narrative move, a totally appropriate narrative play. But as the standard thing that we see on the table in matched play and conventional games, it just doesn't quite sit with me in terms of the whole vibe of the meta narrative of 40K, and everything should not be a special narrative moment in which these three craft worlds are combining to fight. Like, your army can't always be that. I don't know. It doesn't do it for me. So I'm very excited about this change, just from a story perspective.
Oh, me too. And I mean, like, really, if you want that kind of experience, just play multiplayer games.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, totally. Or I mean, in narrative play, like, whatever, make all kinds of concessions. But man, I think it's going to be so good for the game. And I also love what you said about forcing people to get more creative about solutions, because then you can't just grab the best units from each sub-faction to make a power list. You have to get really creative about how you're going to play the game and play in a way that is more thematically appropriate to the craft world that you're choosing. And that, I feel like that's only good, not just for 40K, but also for, Eldar players having fun in the hobby.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it starts me like, just say you're going to go with like a Wraith host. Do you really need like the Sears on jet bikes? Like, I'll tell you right now, for like my foot slogging sort of Yandon Wraith host build, like I'm definitely using, foot characters. I just feel like they operate better, a little bit more cohesive. They're easy, like just in terms of like bubble wrapping them and all that kind of stuff. I feel like they're easier to sort of work into, big, huge units of Wraith blades and all the rest of it. I don't know. I just think better mechanical cohesiveness with your faction usually makes you a better player. I feel like it sets a sort of good. I think it will help players who are like newer to the game or like less experienced in terms of like list building sort of get to grips with like what it takes to make a good army, like a good army list too. Yeah. Because a lot of times people try to do too much, and then it just turns into like, just a random collection of odds and ends. And, I think like a lot of people, they struggle to get in time for games, and, with a somewhat like, it's like the old Star Wars movies, they're probably half the reason they were so good is because of the limitations and just the ingenuity and creativeness it took to overcome any sort of technical limitations. And I think that's true in Warhammer too.
I love that suggestion. I also think that's probably I'm not going to say anything smarter than that. So I think that's probably a pretty good thing to finish on. Is there anything you want to leave us with about Infinity Circuit or your plans for 2022?
Yeah. So I think like, just for the show, if you're somebody that's, looking for like a resource in terms of how do I make my like my army concept come to life? How do I get this thing, on the table and doing well in games? And, you're looking for, like pure sort of like Aeldari resource, come on over, give us a listen. And because there is just going to be so much to talk about in the future. Like, I cannot wait for the next few months. Like, Eldar players are going to have no limit to what we have to talk about, because man, Pandora's box is about to open, and it's going to be
and you already know what's inside.
Oh yeah,
it's so crazy. Exciting.
It's going to be awesome.
Do you have a link we can stick in the video description?
Yeah, I will definitely hook you guys up with that. And let me see, actually. Yeah, I'll send that to you after we're done recording. You can stick that in the.
Cool. So we'll stick a link to Alex's amazing podcast in the video description. There will also be for those of you who are Patreons and submitted questions. Thanks so much for submitting questions. You will have also enjoyed early access to this video. Below the link to Alex's podcast, I'll also stick a link for my Patreon in case there are listeners out there who are interested in early access to future videos. If you liked this conversation, I hope that you will click like. If you have not yet subscribed, I hope you will consider subscribing. And if you have questions for Alex or thoughts about, well, actually, I should ask Alex, are you game to answer some questions on the YouTube interview?
Oh yeah, I'm always game to answer questions. I can hop into the YouTube video. I'll answer questions in the comments section. That's no problem. You guys will see me. I'm Cavalier, little lion icon for the Lions of Assyrian. That's my Eldar army.
Nice.
And can hit me up on email, cavalier.ava@gmail.com, or you can ask me questions on Instagram. I've got did a lot of stuff for Frontline Gaming over the years in terms of like painting tutorials and all that kind of stuff. So if anybody has like questions on painting, how did you do that? Like I can send you sort of step by step on however I did a various thing. And I'm always down to talk Eldar, whatever faction you play. I'm always down to talk.
That's great. Thanks so much, Alex. And just on the painting front, I know Alex used to be a full-time professional commission painter, so he's a serious authority on this, and his models are beautiful. So hopefully he can answer some questions. All right, thanks, man. I hope to maybe have you back on the show in the future post Codex when you can say more, and hopefully we're all going to have a great 2022 season with a brand new Codex and a variety of amazing builds.
Oh, I think that we will.
Okay, guys, thanks so much. We'll look forward to seeing Alex again down the road, and I will talk to all of you again in the very near future. Take care.